I think there is a lot of misconceptions with digital photography, and one of those is you should always shoot raw files and process those raw files however you see fit afterwards in your computer. And I'd like to challenge that idea. And one of those reasons is because there was a way of working with photography in the film era which involved having the look of your finished images premeditated by the choice of film you were using. And you were stuck with shooting a whole series of images, a roll, if you will, as the minimum set of images in this quantity in the same style or genre: color, transparency, color negative, black and white. And there's a value in this in that it locks you into learning how to compose, expose, and render a scene given the restrictions and limitations of the particular film you've chosen. One of the things I really appreciate about film is this idea that you are fixed and locked into a certain type of look, and it restricts the kind of image making that you take. For instance, when I load up a roll of black and white film in my film camera, I go and I usually put like a yellow filter over the lens, and I go around and I know that subjects that might appeal to me visually because of their color, I know that I can't capture that. And so I have to be looking in other areas. I have to look at the scenery in a different way in order to capture it on film. And these kinds of restrictions and limitations are actually very positive and very healthy as an artist. I think artists always flourish in the context of being fixed within certain boundaries and limitations, because it forces you to get creative. One of the problems with shooting raw files in digital cameras is it makes it a lot harder to premeditate your intention, knowing that with a raw file you can render it any which way you can afterwards, whether you want it to be color, black and white, Polaroid style, or whatever, retro style, HDR. I mean, the amount of manipulation that you can do to an image file in post is almost unlimited. But that very same freedom of expression in the post-production phase translates to a lack of creative intention during the camera phase of recording the image, because you don't really know what you're going to do ahead of time if you can do anything you want afterwards. So having boundaries and limitations is a very healthy thing, and for that reason I'd like to suggest to you a radical idea, which is to shoot in-camera JPEGs with your digital camera using the baked-in film style presets. And I'm going to explain how you should try doing that. So one of the things about these presets is, I know certainly on the Panasonic Lumix Micro Four Thirds cameras, they render a very nice dynamic monochrome black and white image. That's in fact what we're using right now. And Fuji has some very interesting color presets in their X series cameras. What I would suggest is that you treat these preset JPEGs as you would a roll of film. In other words, set your camera to JPEG only with a film preset that you're interested in trying out, and then dedicate yourself to shooting that style only for a fixed predetermined quantity, like for instance 24, 30, 36 images straight off, just as if you were shooting a roll of film. And don't change the settings until you've achieved your number of frames in that style. Now once you've shot your 24, 30, or 36 exposures, you can go ahead and change the film preset to a different style, as if you had loaded a different kind of film in your camera. And then you can go ahead and continue shooting with that new film preset style. And I'd like to suggest that a good reason for why you should do this instead of shooting raw files and then rendering them any which way in post is because the very act of seeking out, composing, and exposing a photograph is intrinsically dependent on the kind of output you're expecting to use. For instance, what you see in a scene, knowing it's going to be rendered only in black and white, is going to be much different than rendering a scene in full color and then in the back of your mind thinking, well, I can convert it to black and white later if I need. But no, you're not going to frame and compose the scene properly if you don't know it's going to be only black and white. A scene that appeals to your eye strictly because of color, for instance, you might be tempted to take the color shot or the raw file, but you're not going to take that shot knowing that it's going to be rendered only in black and white, or you would compose and expose it differently knowing it's going to be rendered in black and white. So your intention ahead of time governs much more the end result, and that's why creatively limiting yourself purposefully to using baked-in film presets in JPEG only mode is a really powerful way to develop your creativity with photography, especially with digital photography, because the problem with digital photography is not that you don't have enough control, it's that you have too much control and you rarely know what to do. You don't really focus your intention well. And that's a universal problem with digital. This is why in cell phone photography, this is why Instagram, Hipstamatic, and all these other apps are so popular, because they bake in certain looks and limit your choices ahead of time. So now, skeptics might also suggest, well, why not shoot RAW plus JPEG? This way you get the baked-in film preset in the JPEG file, and you have the flexibility of having the RAW file in case something goes wrong and you need the RAW file. Well, I'll suggest to you that shooting RAW plus JPEG is kind of like working the trapeze with a net. You're never going to be as bold and daring knowing there's a safety net. The thing about JPEGs is it forces you, just like shooting film does, it forces you to have to get it right in camera the first time, rather than relying upon saving the shot later in post. And actually, if you've used good processing software, you'll find that there's a lot of information in a JPEG file, a high-res JPEG file that's been properly exposed. There's a lot of information in those files that you can extract to get good images without needing necessarily a RAW file. So again, the advantage of these shooting JPEG only is it's going to make you more intentional with your photography. Now, people that shoot cell phone photography know this, because most people aren't shooting RAW files with cell phones. So cell phone photography is intrinsically JPEG photography already, and it's very popular and people do good work with it. So I would suggest for the users of dedicated digital cameras to really investigate learning to use your camera's preset film modes in JPEG only. In my recommendation of shooting JPEG only files, I would be remiss if I was not to mention to you a most critical thing about processing these files. Now, one of the main objections that people have with not shooting RAW files is you lose the ability to have lossless editing of your files in post, which is one of the main advantages of RAW files. You can losslessly adjust the file without losing the original data. Well, it's a misconception, because you can do lossless editing of JPEG files also. And the way you do that is the power of the Save As command. Regardless of which editing software you're using for processing your your JPEG file in post, the first thing you want to do is you want to shut off any feature that auto saves the changes. You don't want to auto save your changes. The second thing is, once you're done with all your adjustments, you're going to hit Save As, and you're going to make a change to the file name. Now what I do is I append the name of the file with the letter, either A, B, or C, depending on the resolution of the file. And changing the file name using Save As, all the changes are applied to that new file name, not the original. The original JPEG file does not get changed. Now, one of the other advantages of shooting RAW files is you get to use your RAW software that you might like to use. And you might object to having to shoot JPEGs. I don't get to use that RAW software. Well, a lot of RAW softwares enable you to also process JPEGs. One example, one of the RAW development softwares that I like to use is SilkyPix. SilkyPix not only allows you to, of course, process the RAW file, if you have it available, but it'll also enable you to process the JPEG file shot with that same camera. And again, when you go to render those changes, if you change the file name, append a suffix letter to it, for instance, then all the changes you've made to the file are only applied to the new file, not to the original. So the original stays the same, and it's lossless editing of your original JPEG file. This is Joe Van Cleve. Have a good day.